All right, today we have Dan Hatman from the Scouting Academy, and he's got some unique insight into the scouting realm, and having worked with GMs and other scouts. And Dan, thanks for coming on the show. I appreciate it.
Oh, happy to have it.
I kind of want to start with just an intro, and how you came into the league and how you started the Scouting Academy. If you could give listeners and viewers an idea of how you started.
So my background actually starts at the University of Albany, only place a 5'10" walk-on D tackle has a chance. I got injured early in my career, and they had a long history of student assistant coaches. So I got in the coaching realm while still as an undergrad, and that happened to be where the Giants did training camp.
Right.
So my work with the football team led to a recommendation to Dave Gettleman, who was the pro director at the time. And Next thing I know, I'm an intern with them. I spent a couple years there, got a Super Bowl ring for the 2007 campaign. Ultimately left, went to University of Massachusetts, coached there, D-line and special teams, then to the Jets, then to the Eagles. And across all those places, really recognized that many people getting in these days were under 25, very limited in football experience from a team standpoint. Scouts used to be 40, 45 plus longtime coaches. A lot of them it was a retirement job to shift from the coaching realm over. So those guys had decades of football experience, and the model had shifted to young people, bright people, those that can start to see the 30,000 foot picture. And at the same time, because there wasn't a formal training or decades of experience, you've got young people, again, competent people, but didn't have a foundation to work for.
Right.
And so they're thrown in the deep end. It's time to go do this job, except you're not exactly sure what to do. And there's not a lot of time to learn on the job and not a lot of training on the job. So the long and short of it is that we started the Scouting Academy to help those people, give them that foundation, let them see what the job's like, give them the tools right from GMs, right from head coaches and personnel directors, hear from them, and then ultimately be able to hit the ground running with the teams and be much more effective.
Right. No, and I can attest to the Scouting Academy. It's a great resource. I'm going through it right now. There's a lot of good network going on, with other people that are going through it. So it's great to have, this kind of, tool nowadays for guys that, like you said, younger guys, especially. It seems like you're totally correct. A lot of the guys that are going through academy and guys that you follow and meet on, social media and whatnot are all young guys. It's really a young man's game. So the fact that you started the Scouting Academy to kind of mentor and tutor these guys and create a network is it's unlike anything else. And I could totally attest to that. And, I'll be sure to, give some links and whatnot later on in the podcast so people that want to join can go ahead and sign up. But so we'll get into a little more of the Bills talk itself. Obviously, the news broke this morning that they, fired Doug Whaley, and there's even supposedly changes within the scouting and personnel department with the Bills. So I kind of want to give a rundown, Dan, about, the different types of scouts that are in an organization, because I don't think that's really talked about that much. Maybe people don't really understand that. So can you first get into the Blesto network and the Blesto Scouts? Because according to the Bills media guide, there are a few on the staff. And what role do they play as the Blesto Scout?
So right now you have, I believe it's 7, maybe 8 teams in the National Football League that partner together with the group Blesto, and that was originally formed as the Bills, Lions, Eagles, and Steelers talent organization. Not all of those teams are currently with them, and obviously some more have come on board. The idea there is sourcing your initial candidate list, helping get verified times, helping on the background information, a lot of the detail work that teams are going to do for every player, and all the teams are going to cover the same players. These teams come together, they pool those resources. So each team hires a scout that's a member of that organization. Then those scouts go work for Blesto, generating reports that get disseminated to all teams.
Oh, okay.
So it's less about the talent evaluation of the player. Again, the individual organization is going to assess how good the player is throughout the process. But again, it's more about filling in all the other blanks
Right.
and lightening the workload. Because if each team had to go out, source 1,000 prospects, do all the verified height, weight, speeds on them coming out of their junior year, go start your background work, and again, put all that process by themselves for the duration of the year, you'd
Right.
stretch your human capital so thin that they wouldn't be able to spend time watching the film. So
Totally.
that entity comes together again to share some of that fundamental information. Teams will always then go source additional information that differentiates and
Okay.
helps them get a different level of insight, but it's a starting point. So the Bills are one of those organizations. They do have one staff member who is assigned to go work a region for Blesto and then
Okay.
pass that information along. That scout will also do additional responsibilities for the Bills, and generally speaking, it is the stepping stone from a scouting assistant, which is an in-house entry-level, sometimes intern-type position.
Right.
Then you move to the Blesto role, which is where you get your feet wet going on the road and doing school
Awesome.
calls. And then from there, you move into an area scouting position.
Okay, so did you ever hold a position similar like that, or did you, I know you've worked with several organizations. Is that how you kind of moved your way up?
So inside of a team, you have two verticals.
Okay.
College scouting, which is what everybody thinks of when you talk about NFL scouting, and that's the guys that we went on the road all year, sourcing the players that we just saw draft over the last few days. The second vertical is pro scouting. That's where I worked. So
Okay.
when I got done with my scouting assistant time, I got put into the pro scouting side of things in part because of my coaching background. Your pro scouts, one of their first primary responsibilities is doing what they call an advance report. So I would study our next opponent. So the coaches would be, let's say Buffalo's playing the Jets. So the coaches are literally down in the Meadowlands, for example, playing the Jets. That's going to be Sunday. They're going to come back Sunday night. Monday morning, they're going to break down that game film. They're going to bring the players in, break it down with them, go on the field, work through the mistakes, and then they're going to put the Jets team to bed. And let's say the next week they're going to move on to New England. Well, I spent the last week or two studying New England.
Gotcha.
So when we got together Monday night, the coaches, like I said, put the Jets team to bed, completely got done with that. I come in Monday night, usually right after dinner time, and I put together a huge presentation saying, okay, here's New England, here's their personnel, here's what they've been doing, here's any changes since the last time we saw them. And I get the coaches jump started on the game planning process because they have Monday night, all day Tuesday when the players are not there. And by Wednesday morning, the players show back up to work. You're starting to install your game plan. Now, you continue to tweak that and add things all the way through Friday, but a huge portion of the heavy lifting for the coaches is done by Wednesday morning. And again, they're not starting usually till Monday night. So between the quality control coaches and the advanced scouts, we help give the coordinators and the position coaches the tools to get their job done.
Okay, so there's two sides of the house, like you just went over, the pro side and the guys that are actually on the road. So the guys that did the legwork for these prospects. And it looks like, the Bills have obviously a bunch of area scouts. So can you kind of talk about, maybe how it's broken down across the country as far as how an organization sends out a scout to each area or is in charge of a specific area?
Sure. So most college departments will have a director. Sometimes they'll hold a different title, such as director of player personnel, maybe assistant GM. But for the vast majority of teams, they are the college scouting director. That person is obviously responsible for everything that happens in that department and presenting information to the GM. They're also usually your top evaluator on the college side.
All right.
That individual may or may not have an assistant. They almost always have a coordinator, which is a low-level, again, entry-level type position. This person's the right hand. They're helping run the logistics of the department. Again, helping make sure all the information's collected properly, entered properly into the system so they can be presented up the food chain. And then you'll have a layer of what they call area scouts, usually 6, Northeast, Mid-Atlantic, Midwest, Southeast, South or Southwest, and then West Coast. And they are organized usually by states. So your Northeast scout might have everything from Maine down to maybe Maryland and over to, Ohio or Pennsylvania. That area scout is responsible for every draft eligible player in their region, in their states.
Right.
So your Northeast is going to have more schools per capita than your Midwest or your West Coast, but they have a shorter distance to drive.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas, again, your West Coast Scout might be covering everything from Washington State down to Arizona over to maybe a Kansas or a Colorado or what have you. So a huge regional footprint, but less schools in between.
Gotcha.
So that area guy, again, the heavy responsibilities, background, character. You have to know these guys cold. You do evaluate them as players. That gets passed up the food chain and provides a structure to how the executive level watches film. The executives are not just grinding on random players all day, every day. They're from the area scout center report. Hey, I went to Washington State. They had one guy that I gave a second round grade to, and they had 5 guys that I gave 6th round grades to. Well, the GM is going to take the guy with the second round grades, and that's going to go into his hopper for more immediate viewing, and the 6th round guys will circle back on later in the process. And so as all the scouts are sending in reports each week, the GM or directors are slowly but surely building their list of who do I need to watch and prioritize in the process.
So they just
and the
prioritize.
Last layer, go ahead.
No, that's awesome. And that's great insight to have, because, as you have the upper level personnel people, the Whaleys and the pro personnel guys, there's no way they can watch everyone. So it's nice to have, an idea on how the hierarchy works.
Well, sure. And this is also when people start saying, well, how did the draft stock change so much? Sometimes it's just a player that had not been prioritized earlier in the process. The GMs and executives finally get a chance to watch, and they really like them. They go meet with them at an all-star game or a combine. Again, they really like them. They go to a private workout or a top 30 visit, and they really like them. And yeah, a guy might have had mid-second round grade from the area scout, but by the time the top level got done with them, it might be mid-first round.
All right. So, okay, now in regard to the draft, because there was rumors that a lot of the scouting personnel for the Bills and even GM Doug Whaley were, possibly in jeopardy of losing their job after the draft. So with that said, and you went over the hierarchy and how important this is, and of course they're doing this work all year round. That's another thing fans need to keep in mind. They're doing this all year round. But how does that affect the draft, specifically the draft board? I mean, and how soon before the draft is a board set?
So that varies. And the easiest answer I can give is when the final decision maker is comfortable with all the players on the board and where they're at, and the board is set. So that could be a day or two before. That could be a week or two before. I think the longer a staff is together and in place, the more processes they have polished. So I would say that Green Bay and Baltimore's board is probably set before, this year, Indianapolis, with Chris Ballard just taking over. My guess is, him being comfortable with every player top to bottom and having to work with new staff in Indianapolis that he didn't hire probably took him, a few days longer than, again, Green Bay or Baltimore, who've been together for, almost decades now in that process. So to your question of what does that all mean? Well, the area guys, their information is filtered in. The pro days really close the process for them, unless something comes up like Gary and Conley, where there's a question now, and the area guy maybe has to go back to Ohio State and help investigate that.
Right.
But the bulk of their work is done by the time the pro day closes at their schools in their area. Again, then it shifts to the director levels and above in terms of how much do we value this player. And then again, as the board gets set in the days or weeks preceding, that's done. The hay's in the barn. Now it's down to whoever the 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 people are that actually make the decisions, ownership, team presidents, general managers, head coaches, whatever mix they're in. Those guys then work the board. In terms of the actual draft room, when you're on the clock, this is not 20 people clamoring for what to do.
Right.
You might have 20 people in the room. Unless you are called upon to answer a question, you sit there and let the decision makers work. Oftentimes, an area guy may be brought in to answer one question if decision makers are splitting hairs on a prospect. But usually they're not actively participating until your 5th round and later, when maybe not everybody has watched a player. And someone needs to come in to tell, hey, we're thinking about taking X player. Give us your thoughts on them. Or, hey, we got 2 players in your area we're considering. Who do you like more? Again, they're really drawn out to help on the actual day of decision making in those roles, and then they're really heavily used for undrafted free agents. So the bulk of
Right.
the lower level staff members' work in the draft process is just kind of hang in there, wait, answer a few questions, and then when it's time to fire on the guys in your area that we want to sign as undrafted free agents, go recruit.
Right.
So coming back to what happens when everybody's nervous about their job, well, they gave everything that they know to the decision makers, and then they don't know whether or not they're going to be kept. So yes, it's a situation where they might be living in fear, but you're not going to go blab what you know to everybody else,
Right.
because these are small circles and people do talk to each other. And if you get known as somebody who's going to leak your team's information, no one's going to hire you.
Right.
So you do the best job you can, and you hope that even if moves are made, that you could earn a position with the next staff or retain yours or what have you. So you just kind of hang tight. You hang tight and you do your job, and you wait and see more than anything, which I know
Right.
can be a very scary proposition, to say the least.
I can only imagine. That's the thing with scouting, man. It's it's very much like coaching. It's like, what have you done for me lately? And I know a lot of it is putting your time in the scouting department. But that's a lot. Fans don't understand that, Dan. Is they said, well, if we have a new regime, new coaching staff, why wouldn't they have fired whether it be Whaley and the scouts prior to the draft? And you touched upon it, because these are small circles, and all that information we get out. And the other part of it, Dan, and I don't know if this is true or not, so I'm going to run it by you, is, say hypothetically, like I think last year the Browns fired a bunch of their scouts pre-draft, and I think the Rams did it this year too. Now, what's the danger of doing that? I mean, can other teams legally pick up, this free agent scout, and obviously that scout could really, kind of give intel on, the inner workings of the organization, or even draft boards and stuff like that, right, Dan?
So the unfortunate misconception is it was publicized. Neither the Browns nor the Rams, to my understanding, actually fired those scouts. They simply let guys know, hey, your contract is not going to be renewed when it expires after the draft. So scouts' contracts, usually 2-year deals, end after the draft.
Wow. Okay.
Most guys just get picked up and continue on in those situations, but it does give decision makers an easy window to get out. So I know for a fact the Rams guys were not fired. They were simply told, we're not going to renew your contract. You are under contract to work for us through the draft, and your contract has a non-disclosure, so you're not able to tell anybody else what you know. The one unique one this year was the Redskins actually fired Scott McCloughan. So he was available as a free agent, basically, to be picked up as a consultant by any team and to tell them whatever he knows.
He also runs a scouting agency, doesn't he?
He is, I believe, he ran that between Seattle and Washington. My understanding is he is going to be opening that back up for business, yes.
Yeah, I believe he had to step away from it just because he was working for the Redskins. But, wow, that's an interesting take. Did any team pick him up as a consultant? Do you know?
Not that it was publicized. I made a joke on Twitter that I would assume the Giants, the Eagles, and the Cowboys may have all called in and paid him a fee to get his thoughts on the board, because Washington admitted that Scott's influence on their board was there. He helped set a lot of that prior to his dismissal after the combine. Obviously, they changed some things. Players like Jonathan Allen falling to them could not have been expected. So you didn't necessarily get insight into exactly what Bruce Allen was going to do, but you could certainly hire Scott. Hey, here's X amount of cash. Who are your top 100 players or what have you? Those deals very well might have been struck after his dismissal.
That makes sense. Okay, so now back to kind of the Bills and the draft board itself. So obviously the board was set, with Whaley and the scouting personnel in place. The board was set, and the Bills drafted some really good players. They made some good moves up and down the board. So much so, they made some good moves, especially that first round move to get a first round pick next year. That was kind of surprising from a Bills standpoint. Usually we're on the other end. We're usually trading up, to get talent. But it was a good move by the staff. And it's one of those things, like Bills fans, we feel like it was a different draft because it felt like it was a McDermott draft just based on, the moves they made and the personnel they picked up, the talent they picked up, because they were not just talented, but they are character guys. And that's the thing McDermott's been preaching since coming on as Bill's coach. So, I mean, as far as the board goes, do you think McDermott would have had the final say there then? It feels like he did. I mean, what's your opinion on that?
Yeah, I mean, there's been reports out since right before the draft that Sean was the final decision maker on all those moves. I don't have internal confirmation of that or anything of the nature, but yes, I would feel pretty comfortable saying that Sean probably made the decisions on who to take.
Now, is he able, because it was kind of odd to watch the board fall the way it did and the moves that the Bills made, because there were a couple times where he jumped up, we traded up to get, Zay Jones right in front of, a few picks in front of Carolina when they wanted a receiver as well. And then they also did it again when we took the tackle Dion Dawkins from Temple. They again jumped in front of Carolina, who also had a need at tackle. Do you think that he had some kind of insider information from Carolina, or you think that's just a good job of him and the personnel department scouting other teams ahead of them and what they're looking to acquire in the draft?
Yeah, based on when he was hired by Buffalo, no one in Carolina was going to be telling Sean who we like, simply because you do become competitors in that space on those days. But Sean clearly is going to have an understanding of what the coaches under Ron Rivera like in Carolina. And so it makes it easier to say, this is the kind of guy they would like. If we want him, we're going to have to get ahead of them, because there's a very good chance he could be gone.
Right. Because I know one of the names that popped up as, a possible GM candidate is a guy from Carolina, and that's Panthers assistant GM Brandon Beane. Do you have relations with him? Do you have any opinions on him? Is he ready to become a GM in this league if he were to be interviewed?
I know he's been interviewed, I believe, 3 times. In fact, he was interviewed for Carolina's job when Dave Gettleman earned that right a couple years back. I don't know Brandon personally. I haven't worked with him. I do get the sense that Mr. Richardson really likes Brandon and thinks very highly of him. I take that as far as to think that he may or may not be being groomed Eric DaCosta style to be in place come the day that Dave decides to step away for whatever reason. And that could be years down the road, don't get me wrong.
Right.
So if Brandon wants to be the decision maker today, obviously I think, they would have to let him go, and they can't stop him from taking a promotion. But again, he grew up there. I believe he has the trust of Mr. Richardson. I could see him being in line for a promotion down the road where he's at now.
Okay, so does the organization, do the Panthers have to give him the okay to interview for other jobs, or it's just kind of a given?
My understanding of the league rules is that if you are going for final control, which on the personnel side would be the 53-man roster. So if Brandon was being offered the opportunity to interview for a job, it would give him 53-man control in Buffalo. Carolina cannot stop him from interviewing.
Okay. Now, across the league, do you have any other maybe possible candidates that if we are to hire a new GM and not just give the role or that hat to Sean McDermott, do you have any guys across the league that we should be on the lookout for, or maybe you can look into?
I think the easy dots to connect are him to Carolina, because he was just there for 4 years. I certainly understand that people develop over time, but Sean's formative years were in Philadelphia under Andy Reid.
Yeah.
So personally, without having worked with Sean, because he was gone by the time I was there, I am more intrigued by him finding someone that has Philadelphia ties. And Sean started there, I believe, in 99 or 2001. Or he was in Philadelphia for a long, long time. And those guys are scattered all across the league. I mean, he crossed paths with Mark Ross back then. He crossed paths with Scott Cohen back then. John Spytek back then. Joe Banner today put a tweet out and said, pay attention to Brett Veach, who's the co-director of player personnel for Andy Reid in Kansas City. And Brett and Sean worked together there.
Right.
So, that just limiting it to Brandon Beane and Don Gregory, while being, both very respected individuals in the league in Carolina, I don't think is all encompassing of who they could consider.
Mm-hmm.
I would also say I would be a little bit surprised if they didn't have a strong, plan A and plan B kind of locked in. Doesn't
Mm-hmm.
mean it couldn't happen, but clearly the Pagulas knew they were going to do this.
Right.
And set things up accordingly. I highly doubt they made this decision last night. And as such, if they knew they were going to do this, they, if they're smart, are planning next steps in conjunction with, a Sean McDermott. And as such, I doubt they're opening up a haphazard search of just anybody starting today.
Right.
My guess is they've been vetting candidates for a while and have their, I don't know, I'd ballpark it 3 to 5 maybe, finalists ready to come in and interview over the next few days, because not only do they have to get that person in place, but there are rumors that the entire scouting department will not be returning. And if they have to staff the entire department top to bottom, they've got work to do.
Oh, there's no doubt about it. And when you factor in that they also own the Sabres and are doing similar searches for a general manager to the mix, I mean, you know that the airplane owned by the Pagulas is going to be traveling a lot because they have a lot of work ahead of them,
Sure.
So as far as the draft goes, I know you pay attention to every team in the league. Where, off the top of your head, where would you grade the Bills draft? Is there any player in particular that caught your eye that you thought they got great value in?
Well, I stay away from the grading piece because what I think of the players and who I prefer doesn't make a difference to what Sean and his staff want to have available to them.
Right.
I am intrigued by the fits of a Tre'Davious White and his skill set relative to what Sean has historically liked. That one certainly intrigues me. Obviously, the quarterback pick later on, that was a name we heard a ton about in the process. So to have a David Culley on staff, who I have a great deal of respect for from our time in Philadelphia, to give him someone of that profile is intriguing. To give Juan Castillo the profile of a Dawkins is intriguing, because having known those coaches, worked with them, seen the players that they prefer to work with, these seem to be very logical, easy fits. Now, whether or not they turn into high-quality starters across the board, different story. That still goes back to actual player development. But they do seem to have themselves lined up for smart, hopefully smooth fits.
Right. And back to David Culley, you worked with him, right? Prior with the Eagles. Now,
yes.
He last season was with the Chiefs as a wide receivers coach. And now he's a quarterbacks coach. So what type of things can we expect as Bills fans, or maybe just, type of person he is as far as coaching the quarterbacks now? Because a lot of fans were kind of, mystified as why they brought a guy that that coached receivers in as a quarterbacks coach, especially considering that we have a quarterback in Tyrod Taylor that has struggled a lot overall.
Fair enough. Well, the first thing I'll say about David is he's not a wide receiver only coach. He has been well-versed in the quarterback game for a long time. And he just had other guys coaching the quarterback. And it has nothing to do with David's inability. David's also just a really, really good wide receiver coach. So when you see the Albert Wilsons of the world and the guys that he's brought along, going back to the Philly days, all the way to the Kansas City period of time, he has really helped quite a few wide receivers. So, I think it's Andy leveraging that asset where he needed him to be, whereas now he has an opportunity to really blossom and work with a quarterback. He is not just a good person and not just a good coach, but he's someone that the players want to play for and believe in. He's going to coach from a standpoint of, for lack of a better term, love. He's going to show these players, I want to help you improve. I'm going to show you how I'm going to do that. I'm going to hold you accountable to your end of the bargain, but I am going to equip you with the tools to be successful. And it's really easy for players of all backgrounds. And again, just look at all the wide receivers and their picadillos that he's had to coach and bring along. And he's extracted so much from them in that process. It gives me hope that he'll be able to do the same thing at the quarterback position.
Right. And looking at the coaching staff, top to bottom, that McDermott had brought in, I'm impressed because they do have a wealth of experience. Juan Castillo was a great hire. He's been in the league for a while, and he's coached
Phenomenal
up.
offensive line coach.
Right. And so do you expect, everyone talks about the Rick Dennison system and the zone blocking system. I'm pretty sure that Castillo has a wealth of knowledge in that scheme. Am I wrong? Am I correct in saying that?
No, Juan is very smart in terms of the concepts of all the blocking systems. He'll be able to bring the guys along. The difference is simply personnel. Right now, the personnel that Rex and Greg Roman and company had put together to be a power run team does not fit what historically Dennison and company have done. Doesn't mean they can't get there. I think year one, they're going to have to be hybrid and adaptable.
Absolutely.
They're going to have to play with a few different concepts, which Juan can help with. He is well versed there, so he'll be able to work in conjunction with Rick. Hey, this is the things that I think our guys can do well right now. Get them activated on that, and then over time, they will put together the personnel to do the things that they want to do.
Right, and that makes sense, especially, with moving up and drafting Dion Dawkins. You can tell he's that type of player where, he's played in both, type of blocking styles, whether it be power or zone or man concepts. But he has that ability to, scoop to the second level and target pretty well. And, he's a powerful guy too. So when they need him to down block on those, power concepts, he's able to do it. Really long arms. So he's a guy that, a lot of people are saying a guard. Do you see him as a guard or a tackle?
I think that he'll probably be at guard. I think he'll be a good swing player, competitive player early on, and give them that inside-outside versatility. This was not an ideal draft to be trying to acquire immediate starters at that position. So I think you've acquired someone who becomes a 7th or 8th offensive lineman in year one, which is still a really good spot. Means he's dressing on game day, which is critical. He'll be part of your 46. And then if his development curve starts faster than expected, he'll be able to have some impact during some point in the season. Obviously, if there's injuries, he'll be able to step in and help bridge some gaps. And I think you're looking at him as a player that, for his second camp, should really be competing for starting time.
So you don't think he really has a shot to start at right tackle for us? Because currently now...
By no means is it, I'm not really saying that he can't compete.
Oh, okay. All right.
I think they'll absolutely put him in competition. I just like to manage expectations. So saying that he's going to come in and be your right tackle right now, I think is selling the fan base on, not the most likely outcome. Right. The most likely outcome is the veteran player earns a spot early on. Dion continues to do his job, and then he may be able to take over that role in the given season, or at least be in great position to take that over for next season. That's one of the things you're projecting these players to entirely new lifestyle situations, coaching schemes, what have you. Veterans will always have the advantage in terms of winning competitions with guys that are not taking the first 2 rounds. And then those players, you hope, are ready for late year one, if not year 2. When you're drafting players there, literally on the grading sheet, that's what it says. The early first round picks you're saying that's his day one starter, year one impact player, so forth and so on. When you get down past round 3, late round 3 into round 4, you're drafting guys that is saying year 1 quality backup role player, year 2 competitive starter. And that's basically what I'm outlining there.
Right. And that totally makes sense too. And the Bills saw it firsthand drafting, linebacker Matt Milano out of BC, in the 5th round, and then going up in the 6th round and getting another linebacker, Tanner Vallejo from Boise State. Do you have any opinions on those 2 players? Were you able to scout those? I know those guys are later in the draft, but do you have any opinions on those 2 guys?
I do not. Those were not guys I was able to get to in the process. But the beauty of it, right, because we're talking about each team had a draft board of somewhere between 150 and 200 players. New England down around the area of 75, but you've got, teams were evaluating 800 plus guys heavily during the course of the process to ultimately draft 253 of them. You just can't get eyeballs on them all.
Oh, I totally understand. I tried doing, scouting as many as I could, this year, using the stuff I learned, at the Scouting Academy. And it's hard because it's not like you're just watching, one game or two game. You're not watching highlights. You're watching, sometimes full games and cut ups of these players. And it's time consuming, especially when you take into account not just film work, but actually having to write out, what you see on this player. So it's something that I totally respect. And a lot of knowledge that I gained this off season and this draft season, I acquired, with the scouting academy. So, I appreciate all the help you've given me there in that department.
The last thing I wanted to just kind of cover, I know I'm the outlier on this one. I know the timing of the move here in Buffalo is striking people is unorthodox. And when things are different, we don't necessarily agree with them. I saw a lot of comments from, analysts that in most cases I respect their opinions on, talking about dysfunctional organizations and yada, yada. I think the timeline of hiring a GM in January, forcing them in most cases to work with a staff they've never worked with before, to build a draft board that you have to execute from, and then holding that first draft against them as it pertains to their long-term evaluation, is a really, really bad timeline to maximize operations. And I've actually been in consultation with people over the last year advocating for a post-draft model and saying that right now, to start fresh allows you to put together that whole staff, train them on your practices all summer, activate them in the field all fall, so that your first draft class together is 12 months from now and not 3.5.
Right.
So
and that makes sense, Dan. Honestly,
I'm not opposed to what they're doing here. The entire staff being let go. I hope that's not the case. I hope that all it is those who are not under contract, much like the Cleveland and Rams situations we talked about, are obviously free to go look for other employment. Those that are under contract will be evaluated by a new decision maker to determine whether or not they're staying. I hope they're not just absolutely chopping everybody today. If they're holding on to those pieces, letting the new staff, the new decision makers vet them, decide whether or not they want to keep them, I think that would probably be the smarter move. But this timeline, to me, should not be taken as a sign of dysfunction, but one of saying that the way we've always done it hasn't always worked out. So let's see if there's a better model.
And that makes sense because, if they were to fire him pre-draft, I mean, it just adds so much more stress, to the draft process. And who knows, whoever they brought in or whatever, could work well with the people that are already in the personnel department. So it does add a different element to the draft process if it was done pre-draft. So that totally makes sense, doing it post-draft and, bringing that guy in and, slowly working into that and transitioning into a new scouting system, because GMs aren't just brought in and, okay, this is how it's done. They need to implement their grading system, how they do things. So it does take time. Am I right?
As most of us that, especially those that evaluate players in this process externally, we build our boards, the guys that we like. The most unique thing that people don't understand, the GM in most cases is not just sitting there with their own board, doing their own thing and picking their own guys. You are now having to take information from your staff that you're leveraging in the process. Maybe it's their grades, maybe it's the background, it's the character, it's the medical. You're trying to figure out how it fits with your coaching staff. You have to listen to dozens of people in the process who are giving you information, determine its quality and validity, put that all together, weigh that, measure that, decide how much these players are worth, and then activate in the draft on that. This is hard stuff, and it's not just one guy saying anything up there and picking every player. And if you go back through even just Doug's classes, the original class was picked for Doug Marrone. Then he spent 2 classes picking for Rex Ryan. So to try to determine from those 3 classes who are Doug's players, even still, it's incredibly difficult. You want to give him credit for the Ronald Darby's of the world, which is excellent. But those are players that are great for Rex Ryan's system. You think about the power offensive linemen that are all probably going to be gone here soon. And we could look back and say, oh, well, Doug picked that offensive lineman. Not necessarily. He picked offensive linemen that were working for that system that will no longer work in future systems.
Right.
So, even the hindsight bias of looking back and trying to determine what did Doug do without understanding who he was listening to, valuing, leaning on, culling information from, it's impossible for myself who talked to many of these people throughout the course of the year. I can't unpack what exactly is Doug's picks. And elsewhere, I can tell you from my time in Philly who may have had a heavy hand in certain picks in certain draft classes. But again, these are organizational decisions in many cases, at least they should be.
Right.
And so to peg all of it on one person's failures, and many times is not reflective of the process.
Totally. And you throw into account, how the Bills were sold to the Pagulas. I mean, that had a huge bearing on who Whaley was bringing in as far as talent goes in the draft, because like you had mentioned, he had to pick players for specific systems, for specific schemes, for different coaches. And, and right before the sale of the team, they went, 9-7, and it looked like they had a dominant defense. And then, the team was sold, and, Doug Marrone bolts. And that, to me, was the turning point for Whaley, because he looked like he was building something really good. And then he just, again, they brought in Rex, and that to me was a turning point in Doug Whaley's career as a GM for the Bills.
Sure. And it's like I said, unless someone has confirmation on who was the final decision maker on the coaches, and what were the Pagulas roles, and what was Russ Brandon's roles, and what was the coach's roles, and what was he learning from the scouts, and what did the doctors say about certain players. Unless you have all that information verified and at your fingertips, I don't know how any of us can look back on any of these guys and say that each and every pick was their success or their failure.
Right.
Most of the really, really good ones I've been around say when we succeed, it's because of us. When we fail, it's because of me. That's fine. I appreciate you guys taking ownership of that stuff.
Right.
But I've been around situations where decision makers were given poor information that they worked from, and then bad decisions were made. So you can say that, well, they need to vet their people better and make sure that they're always getting quality information. Valid. Mm-hmm. Totally. You get that.
Right.
But what if the person in place that's giving that information has to be there because, I don't know, ownership or whoever wants them to be there, and it might not be because they're the best fit for that decision maker and how he needs information given to him? There's just so many moving pieces. So I appreciate everybody that is devoting their time and energy and money into a club, wanting to see positive outcomes. I love the fans. I appreciate it. There's the only reason any of us are employed is because the fans are passionate and want to be a part of that. I love that part of it. At the same time, when it comes to people saying that I know for 100% fact that X, Y, or Z is the success or failure, I'm saying that I've been an inside part of this for years, and I can't tell you that with stone cold certainty in every situation. So I find it hard to believe that those who are not in the rooms, who are not talking to people, who have not seen the processes, can say with 100% certainty one thing or the other. So all we can hope is that the individuals who are going to be in place are going to be empowered to surround themselves with smart people who understand how they want to see a football team brought together, who can work in conjunction with the coaching staff and build a roster that's going to win ball games. That's what we're all hoping for.
And that's what I try to preach to fans, the last 17 years really have nothing to do with McDermott and this staff that he brought in. And, I really do feel like things are on track. It's probably going to take, a couple years to get it totally in the right direction. But I feel from the top, as far as McDermott goes as a coach, I think he's handled everything really well. I do have high hopes, for his coaching career in Buffalo. And it was great having you on, Dan. And, I appreciate the knowledge and perspective that you brought, because, it's something that, I try to do on Cover One is try to not just ease expectations, but kind of temper, the anxiety that Bills fans and the Bills Mafia feel, because sometimes, they're fanatics about everything. And we all are, because that's what fans are. But we need to realize that, these people, the Doug Whaleys, the scouts, they put a lot of time in. This is their full-time job. This is their reputation. This is their resume. And, as much as we as fans and and especially when it comes to the draft process, want to give our opinions. There's no doubt that these guys, like these guys that are in position scouting in the general manager positions have a wealth of knowledge, experience, well beyond us as fans do.
Well, and the last thing, and this will truly be my last thing, I hope people are not taking any joy or satisfaction after seeing the entire scouting staff fired, from the standpoint of most of the guys that are on the road in the college side, and even the guys on the pro side, are spending, an average college scout spends 200 nights a year on the road away from his family. Wow. He is not making $100,000 a year. All right, so this is not somebody that's making $500,000. You can say, oh, well, he's getting compensated well. These guys are usually not making six figures. They're away from their home 200 nights a year because they love this process. They want to find the best players because they want to keep a roof over their family's head. They want to be able to pay their mortgage. They want to put their kids through school. So, yes, I know it's easy to call for everybody's head, and I get that the coaches, the top coaches and the top decision makers do get paid well. But when they can all these guys, a lot of people are going to be looking for work, may not find it, and have to try to figure out some other way to put food in their kids' mouths and a roof over their head. So I hope people are not taking any satisfaction in that part of it. Again, I can see the optimism in the new regime and what have you, but there are going to be a lot of people that are going to be stressed and trying to figure out their next step, and that's not a call for celebration.
Right. No, I totally agree. And with that said, Dan, it was nice having you on. I definitely want to have you on again. Tell us where the fans and viewers can find you.
Well, you can find me on Twitter at Dan_Hatman. You can find us with the Scouting Academy at the Scout Academy on Twitter. And then our website is scoutingacademy.com. And we try to keep as much information on the website about us, particularly in the FAQ section, if you'd like to dig in or understand our process.
Dan, it was nice having you on. I definitely want to have you on again, and I'll be in touch with you. Thank you.
All right, sounds great.